Hello and welcome to your sixth lesson from the first topic of an introduction to media studies, and this lesson is going to be all about television. Before we begin with today's lesson content, we need to complete another feedback form. Every few lessons or so, we should try and take stock of what we've learnt and work on things that we might need to improve, or at least assess where we might be showing areas of strength or where we need to develop. So your class teacher is going to come around and circle one of the icons on one of the feedback forms. These can be found in your booklets. And again, your job is to find that icon in the guide, pick one of the three options, write it in the teacher feedback, and then write what you're going to do about it in the How to Improve section. Don't forget to include the date and the topic title. So on to our first activity of the lesson, and we need to explore how the television set, that's television as a platform, has evolved. So how have we gone from the first view screen models of television, created by a man called John Logie Baird, who was a Scottish man, and you can see on the left there the very first kind of home model of television set that he made, where you had to go up and look through that circular point and see the screen inside it, all the way through to our Ultra HD 4K curved smart televisions of today. See if you can chart some of the main inventions and technological developments that have taken us from those first models through to the new models we have today. This is our title slide for this lesson, and as you can see, we're going to be learning about television. In the bottom left, as always, we have our topic number and lesson number. So our topic number is number 1. We're still working on an introduction to media studies, and this is lesson number 6. So today we want to learn about television as a platform and explore the potential impact and effect television has on audiences. Have a quick read through the basic, moderate and advanced success criteria and make sure you're ready to make your notes, answer any questions and complete any tasks from this lesson. A brief history of television shows us that the technology was invented in the early 1900s, but it wasn't popular as a platform as we know it today until the 1950s. In fact, it was the moon landings in 1969 which really prompted a surge in purchasing of television sets, and it was in the late 60s, early 70s when most households in the UK and in America had a television. Nowadays, we have around 3 televisions per household. So roughly, how many hours of television do you think a person in the UK watches a day? According to the BARB, that's the Broadcasters Audience Research Board, UK audiences watch approximately 4 hours of television a day. Exploring a brief timeline of television, we can see what each decade offered in terms of developments and advancements in television technology. In the 1920s, we had our first television stations. 10 years later, in the 1930s, only around 200 people in the entire world owned a television. We have a gap here in the 1940s. Have a little think about why that may be. In the 1950s, we had our first remote controls. In the 60s, first colour television. And by 1970, in the UK at least, television was fully broadcast in colour, no more black and white. In the 1980s, television recorders such as the Betamax or the VHS, the video home system, you may remember those as square or rectangular black cassette tapes which had film on them, and they were the precursor to DVDs. In the 1990s, widescreen and 24-hour television broadcasts. That's right, before 1990s, television was not broadcast 24 hours a day. There was some TV in the morning, around about lunchtime and in the afternoon, and for the rest of the time, nothing was broadcast. After the millennium, in the 2000s, we started with our DVD players and high-definition broadcasts. And then in the last decade or so, smart TVs have connected us to the internet with streaming services like Netflix available on our televisions without the need for a dedicated computer. For those of you who were clever enough to realise, in the 1940s it was actually due to the Second World War. That's when broadcasting stopped and the war effort meant we had to focus on different things and television wasn't really a priority. Take a few minutes now to think about why television technology has kept evolving. There are, of course, many reasons why television technology has evolved. Namely, television creators want to sell more televisions. However, most development in any form of media technology are about communicating to a larger audience or a more specific targeted audience on a grander scale, more quickly, more cost effectively, and more conveniently. From an audience perspective, convenience is key. If something is easier or serves our needs better, we're going to want to buy into that media. Major events, as we said, such as the moon landing and the Olympics, prompt people to buy TVs, but also to access more content. And more content is key. The more content there is, the more advertising there can be. So things like Sky Television and broadband networks, television have to be able to adapt to that new technology. We also have better quality of image with high definition and 4K, which obviously gives us a better quality experience. Also, televisions have adapted in terms of their use. It's not just broadcast signals that they need to display. It's also consoles and computers and things like that. If we ignore Sky TV and Virgin Media for a while, and we just look at standard television in the UK, then the two major broadcasters, the two main channels, are the BBC and ITV. But what is the difference between these two services? The BBC is what's known as non-profit, or PSB, and we're going to look at PSB in a moment. ITV is commercial. That means it makes a profit. So why doesn't the BBC have adverts, but ITV does? Well, ITV, as we said before, is a commercial channel, which basically means it's a business. It needs to make a profit. So ITV will buy in a program, let's say X Factor, and they'll spend 10 million plus on buying in that show. Then they will sell the advertising space between that show to advertisers for 15, 20 million and make a profit. And this goes into paying obviously the wages of the employees and the bonuses of the higher up management, but also creates a profit for the business. BBC doesn't work like that. The BBC is funded by a television license, and this is kind of like a tax that we are by law compelled to pay. And currently all households which contain a television must pay the license fee, and that at the moment is £157.50 a year. And that covers the cost of all of the BBC services, from television, radio, online, and everything in between. So how much does the BBC spend a year? Well, on making this lesson, the total licence fee income in the UK was £3.5 billion. Other income from sales of BBC content abroad and other things like that was around 250 million, and they got grants and other funding from the government, which brought in around 300 million. So in a nutshell, we are talking around about £4 billion. Now this money isn't a profit and doesn't actually line the pockets of any individuals. Yes, the management and the staff at the BBC will paid equivalent to their counterparts in commercial institutions such as ITV, but there's no residual money, there's no profit. The BBC spends all of that money on content and fulfilling its public service duty. The BBC is what's known as a public service broadcaster. Now this means that it has to offer a service to the UK. We pay for it through a tax, and therefore it has to actually provide value to every single member of our society. From the knowledge you've gained on the past few slides, it shouldn't be too difficult to work out who the BBC is actually for. As the BBC is a service operated by public funds, it has to be for everybody, because everybody is compelled to contribute towards it. And this is just one reason why there is such a diversity in the channels that BBC offer. On television, you have BBC One and Two. BBC Three is an online-only channel. There's content for children and a range of radio stations that cater for all different types of audiences. Here we have an overview of what public service broadcasting actually means. We've already discussed it to some extent, but here we have a nice definition of what it is. In reality, it's actually any broadcast media intended to provide a service for the good of the public. Now, in fact, all channels in the UK, whether it's the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Dave, whichever channel you're talking about, they are all obliged by law to provide some form of public service broadcasting content. Now, usually that takes the form of the news or some kind of educational programming. It's really important to note that because the BBC is funded purely by a television licence, it doesn't generate more money by getting more views. And this is opposite to commercial channels such as ITV. With ITV, they basically want as many people watching their content as possible, so they can therefore charge more for the advertisements they present. So it's very much in ITV and commercial channels about getting more viewers to make more money. The BBC is not like that. The BBC doesn't get more money if more people watch it, because everybody has to pay for it regardless. It's much more about a service that it offers, and the BBC is always trying to fulfill its remit. It's trying to fulfill its mission objective to provide this service to the general public of the UK. So what service are we actually talking about? What public service does the BBC provide? Well, the BBC is constitutionally established by a royal charter, and this means it is ingrained in our most base laws in the UK. And it's driven by a public service remit, which was actually put forth by its first director, Lord Reith. And his aim, his vision for the BBC, for public service broadcasting, was to educate, inform, and entertain. And I don't think it's by mistake or by coincidence that he put them in this particular order. The Charter itself defines the main objective of the BBC, and it is described as the promotion of the following public services: sustaining citizenship and civil society, promoting education and learning, stimulating creativity and cultural endeavour, representing the UK, its nations and communities, and bringing the UK to the world and the world to the UK. What you need to do is create a chart or a table like this, or you could bullet point it, you could write in full paragraphs, or ask your teacher exactly how they want you to kind of present this work. But what you want to do is create arguments for public service broadcasting and then arguments that speak against public service broadcasting. See how you can do, and you've got 10 minutes for this task. Some of the arguments that speak for public service broadcasting revolve around the idea of it being unbiased, which means it doesn't have any political contracts, it doesn't have any commitment to creating money and therefore going after the policies or ideologies that would generate the most interest from a mass audience. So it can remain unbiased because it is funded by everybody and because it is not profit driven. Success of BBC content and public service content is actually judged by the quality of it, not by ratings, not by the amount of people that watch it. Obviously it promotes education and learning, which can only be a good thing. The idea of it stimulating creativity and cultural excellence, again, can only be a positive thing for society. The idea that it represents the UK and shows off the best qualities of the UK without being biased by any kind of political agenda or any financial obligation. And the idea that it can bring the world to us, again, in an unbiased and real and honest and truthful way. Some of the arguments that speak against public service broadcasting would be the arguments that it is too many demographics to cater for, which basically means because everybody pays for it, the BBC is supposed to provide content for everybody, but there are too many different types of people with too much different content to actually create media for. Some people argue that e-media, online media, does a better job. YouTube, for example, is pluralistic, which means there are so many different options available to people. Why are we spending £150 a household per year when actually e-media offers all of these things for us? Some people argue that it is interfered with by politicians. Although politicians don't have any say over the content of the BBC, they are the ones that guide the funding towards this institution and therefore may be able somehow to interfere with it. There is an argument of free markets as well, which we're going to explore in more detail in another lesson. The idea that everyone has to pay but not everyone uses it, we've already explained. There are some arguments that say nobody watches television anymore, at least young people. And there are the arguments that some people actually get away with not paying, so it's not fair. Fortunately for us, like most media in the UK, television is regulated. This means it is checked over, there are rules and laws, and these are enforced by an independent committee, an independent body called Ofcom, which stands for the Office of Communications. You can visit www.ofcom.org.uk and explore the website, but the main thing to know is that Ofcom is the regulator and competition authority for the UK communications industries. So basically it regulates the television and radio sectors, also fixed line telecoms, mobiles and postal services, also the airwaves in which any wireless device operates. Ofcom works with the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. And on the right here you can see the most complained about programmes on telly between 2010 and 2019, so over the last decade. Not only does the Office of Communications at Ofcom deal with the rules and regulations, but they also handle complaints from audiences. One of the main things that you may be aware of is something called the watershed. Now, the watershed is a term given to the time in which on television you can or can't use more adult content, such as swearing, scenes of sex, drug use, things like this. And generally speaking, it's after 9 o'clock when you can start showing 15s and 18s. Ofcom is actually backed up by research as well. The BARB, who we mentioned earlier, the Broadcasters Audience Research Board, they are responsible in the UK for conducting all sorts of research on television habits. Who is watching, what they're watching, the time in which they're watching, the type of screen, and all sorts of other information gathering questions that they try and provide answers for. The BRB is responsible for delivering the UK's television audience research. They have other companies that they commission to do some of the research on their behalf, but basically all of these institutions collect data and represent the viewing habits of the UK's population. Now, this is very useful for the BBC because it obviously offers insight into what kind of programming is being consumed and adopted and enjoyed, and the kind of effects that this content is having in terms of its remit, so education, for example. But this information can also be purchased by commercial companies, so they can ensure that they are targeting the audiences as they want to. Each year, £7.5 billion is invested in the production and distribution of TV programming and commercial content. Now, that is a lot of money that is spent, and the people spending this money want to make sure that it is being effective, and that's where the BARB come in. Do you think that we need to regulate television and we need to investigate the effects television might have? A lot of people argue that violent television can affect and influence an audience in a negative way. George Gerbner in the 1960s did a study into the effects of violent television, and he suggests that people who watch a lot of television are more likely to be frightened of the world and society, and also that people will adopt ideas and beliefs they see to be normal or commonplace, and often these are represented as being normal on television. Here we have a theorist slide for George Gerbner, and you can see that his subject is media and communications, and he is known for a theory called cultivation theory. His general thoughts are that television is different from other types of media because it is seen to be more real, and exposure to television can affect audiences directly, and he talks about things like copycat behaviour. He also says the more TV you watch, the more likely you are to be affected and influenced. As always, I've boiled down this person's life work into a couple of bullet points, so you do want to read around the subject, especially if you're an A-level student, and you can find more information on his cultivation theory in a book called Living with Television: The Dynamics of the Cultivation Process. The main things to remember here though as well, that this was conducted in the 60s when television was becoming popular. Nowadays we could take some of these ideas and think about different forms of media, but generally speaking this is a theory about the effects of television. Within his work, George Gerbner establishes that cultivation theory makes basically three main assumptions about audiences and the effect of the media. The main assumption that you have to start with is that television is different from other forms of media. Now in the 60s we were basically talking about print media and radio. He was saying that newspapers, magazines and posters and radio programs are not considered to be as real as television because, obviously, television shows us moving image linked with sound, and our brains may interpret that as if we were watching it for real in a real life situation. The second assumption is that television can shape the way we think, and this is where the name of the theory comes from: cultivate, to push, to grow, to move us all in a normalized and in the same kind of direction. And the third assumption is that television's effects are actually limited, and this is because of other influences. We obviously have the influence from our parents, from our friends, our family, we have it from schools and other institutions, especially in the 60s and prior would be the church and other kind of institutions that provide us any forms of influence. So in a nutshell, cultivation theory is the idea that television serves the purpose of influencing a society. Gerbner described it as being the main database, the examples of all of our behaviour, attitudes, ideologies and beliefs. And therefore television has a way of cultivating us, normalising what we believe, standardising our views and giving us all a reference for the entire audience to live their lives. That brings us to two definitions here: ideologies, which is a system of ideas which form the basis of your opinions. You could equate ideologies to the things you believe in. And normalizing, the idea to make things seem the same. The content on the next few slides is really only for A-level students, Of course, if you're not taking A level, you can still listen to these next few slides and develop your knowledge even further, but specifically the details of cultivation theory, which we're about to explore, are really for A level students. So one of the main factors within cultivation theory is the idea of the cultivation differential. And this basically is when Gerbner says the amount of television you consume affects you in a different way. So if you're a heavy user of television, that's 4 to 11 hours a day, then you're more likely to be influenced or influenced more strongly than if you're, say, a light user who is under 5 hours per week. Another aspect of this theory is the mean world index, which is how mean that you see the world is. So the more television you watch, the stronger your view is that the world is a violent, dangerous, or mean place. So the mean world index does explore people's views on the following 3 kind of criteria. If you strongly believe that most people are just looking out for themselves, that you can't be too careful when dealing with other people, and that most people would take advantage of you if they could, then Gerbner's suggesting the people that feel the most strongly about those things watch more television than people who don't. Gerbner also asserts the idea of mainstreaming, which is the idea that television influences people to see things as normal. Now, we've already discussed the idea of normalization, but mainstreaming is the idea that it encourages most people to see things generally, in a broad sense, in the same way. So if we were to take a look at these 5 images here, who would you say is the criminal? Well, I think most people would say the males, either the second image or the third image, and then a lot of people might say the middle image because of the stereotypical way that this character looks, with the tattoo and the shaved head. However, all of these 5 people have been convicted of a criminal offence and are serving time in prison. So there's an example of how many people would assume or would have the same kind of thoughts, and this is an example of mainstreaming, normalising our views. The final aspect to cultivation theory put forth by Gerbner is the idea of resonance. Now this is where audiences kind of check to see if the messages actually align with their real lives. So if the message that they're receiving resonates with them, then it's more likely to impact and affect them. Audiences might filter out or ignore the messages that don't resonate with them or have no relevance. And audiences that already have the viewpoint that's being displayed, it's almost being reaffirmed or giving a double dose of that message. Well done for making it to the final learning check of this lesson. So now it's time just to summarise what we've learned and to check to see if we can fill in any of these boxes. So could you summarise the lesson in 3 bullet points, a sentence or a single word? Rate yourself out of the following categories. Do explore the key questions here. And the answer is PSB, or Public Service Broadcasting. What question would give us that answer? Now is the ideal time to double check to see if you feel you have confidently learnt the learning objective and have you completed the basic, moderate and advanced success criteria. Here we have the specific terminology that was used throughout this lesson. Again, some of it was only really for A-level students, so if you are not an A-level student and you see words on here that you don't recognise, then don't worry too much. But don't forget, you can always go back through this lesson and watch it again. If you've managed to complete all of the work on this lesson and you want some more to do and you've still got time, then here's an extension task. Create a research fact file on the most popular forms and genres of television. As always, we have some exam questions here, and this is just how some of the content within this lesson might appear in your exams. Once again, well done for getting all the way through the lesson, and I can't wait to talk to you again.